All right. So the lesson that we're going to discuss for this meeting is intercultural communication. The lesson objectives at the end of the lesson, students will be able to describe intercultural communication, distinguish the causes of barriers to intercultural communication, and demonstrate sensitivity to the sociocultural dimension of communication with a focus on culture, gender, age, social status, and religion. Right. So before we begin our discussion, I want to ask this question to you guys. When you encounter people from other countries and you do not speak the same language, but you need to communicate with them, how do you convey your message in a way they will understand it and your intention? Anjali.
Hold on. How do you go? Like, ano, what do you mean in your attention? Like, ano? What do you mean by that?
Like your motive. Why do you want to communicate with them? The message or the content in your communication? How do you convey to them in a way that they will understand it, even though we have different language?
Para ma-understand nila, like that. I don't know, depende. I don't know, just use my phone, mag-type or something, because it's hard naman kung if I can't speak their language and they can't with mine. So I think I would just gesture, mag-gestures na lang ako. I don't know.
Gestures, or you said a while ago you use your phone like translator.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So because of the advent of technology.
Yes.
Yeah. We have so many ways now on how to communicate with people from other cultures who speak different language from us. All right, thank you very much. Right. You see, intercultural communication, it is the study and practice of communication across cultural contexts. So basically, we say intercultural communication, or that's what we also call cross-cultural communication, is a form of communication wherein the participants of a specific communication situation are from different cultures, with different backgrounds, with different languages, different cultural orientation. It applies equally to domestic cultural differences such as ethnicity and gender, to international differences such as those associated with nationality or world religion. So we have what we call collective and individual culture, which means that we have our own cultural background even though we are the same Filipinos. Like for example, in the case here in the Philippines, we have different ethnic groups or tribal groups. Like we have many tribal groups in Muslims, like our Lumads and mga Bisaya, Cebuano speakers. So when we interact with each other, it's also a form of cultural, intercultural communication, since we have different cultural background, even though we are Filipinos or living in the same country. And you say in an international level, like for example, in Filipinos communicating with Americans or Koreans or Japanese. Intercultural communication is an approach to relations among members of these groups that focuses on the recognition and respect of cultural differences. So in intercultural communication, it's not just you're going to communicate with people from different cultural background, different cultural contexts. But you have also to recognize and acknowledge our differences. You have to respect them of their cultural upbringing. Seeks the goal of mutual adaptation leading to biculturalism rather than simple assimilation. When we say mutual adaptation leading to biculturalism, it's also immersing yourself to their culture in order to fully understand them. It's like we're going to practice or understand what they are doing in terms of their cultural upbringing. Supports the development of intercultural sensitivity on the part of individuals and organizations to enable empathetic understanding and competent coordination of action across cultural differences. So, which means that in intercultural communication, you have to be sensitive to their background, to their ethnical identity, and everything that makes them up in terms of their cultural background. It is the sending and receiving of messages across languages and cultures, according to Arendt 2009. Culture is not only made up of shared languages or countries, it also refers to different social groups in the same setting. Like, for example, in a classroom, although most of you are Davaoenos, but the thing is, as what I have said, we have what we call collective and individual culture. We have the kind of orientation brought up by our families to us, different from other families. So that's also a part of intercultural communication, wherein we have different social background. For instance, in Manila, different cultures of Muslims, Catholics, and Protestants coexist in the same region. Like, for example, in Davao City is considered as a multicultural salad. It's because people who live here came from different cultural background and different geographical location. Like, for example, in Davao City, there are Muslims, there are Lumads, and there are migrants from other parts of the Philippines, from Manila or from Luzon, from Visayas. That's why Davaoenos speak Davao Cebuano because of the influence of migrants from Visayas, especially Cebuano speakers. That's why Davao City is referred as multicultural salad. Right. Past experiences and cultural grids that were passed down to you influence the way you communicate with others. A cultural grid is a framework of understanding for processing verbal and nonverbal cues specific to a particular culture. For example, when interacting with an Indian tourist, you refer your cultural grid of Indian culture to determine the right way to act and appropriate things to talk about them. You also use this framework to understand his or her gestures and message. So basically, when we say cultural grids, it refers to the past experiences, to your past experiences and background knowledge about people from other or different culture. Like, for example, your past experiences or your schema, your background knowledge about specific tourists, for example, Indian, is that you use that cultural grid of yours in order to interact with them. Yung previous knowledge about their mannerisms, their how they communicate with other people. You use that knowledge in order for you to communicate with them. Right. Communication is much more than a simple transmission of information. It is the mutual creation of meaning. Information is not in itself meaningful. It is only when information is intended and interpreted in some way that it attains significance. So communication, it's not just you're going to utter words in order to communicate with other people. You have to be successful in terms of communicating with them. Hence, you need to use words or strategies to communicate with them in a way that you're going to understand what you're trying to say. And you also have to strategize your ways of communicating with them in a way that they will understand your intention. And you will come up the right interpretation of your message. The sense of culture used in intercultural communication is that of worldview. Culture is a generalization about how a group of people coordinate meaning and action among themselves. One way they do is that through institutions such as religious, political, and economic systems, and family and other social structures. When we say culture, it also affects our worldview. It affects how we see other people from other nations, from other countries, from other cultures. It affects our perspective. Thus, in communication, we should have the right perspective since we are not the only people who live in this world. We should know how to coexist with other people. Thus, we should know the different cultures, their background, their worldview. Communicators as cultural beings. Each person is a cultural being. The values, traditions, and social and political views shared by a group of people are also part of an individual's culture. Also, culture can be made up of people's common history, geographic location, language, social class, religion, as well as their ethnicity, gender, age, beliefs, values, and assumptions. All these aspects, when brought together, make up a person's cultural identity. Now, each one of us, since we are called as communicators, we are referred as cultural beings, and we have our own cultural identity. Our cultural identity is made up of different factors or different aspects. Where we came from, the language we speak, our social class, if we're middle, upper, or in lower or average class, our religion, our ethnical background, our gender, our age, our belief system, our morals, our worldview, anything that makes us up, that's our cultural identity. Which means that cultural identity is a multifaceted aspect of us. No individual belongs to just one group, as each cultural group may intersect with another. Each individual identifies him or herself to a race, ethnicity, language, religion, gender, sexual orientation, generation, and age, and so forth. Moreover, since cultural identities are embedded in the self, individuals relate to the groups they belong to. So, that's what I have said. When we say cultural identity, it's a form of social construct. It's a makeup of different aspects or factors in life. We have our ethnical background. We have our religious background, sexual orientation. Like for example, pwede siya mag-overlap. For example, you are identified as a Catholic, but you're also identified as a Filipino. But even though there are also people identified as Filipino, but they are not identified as Catholic, they have different religion. We also have different generations or age brackets. Generations, we have you are a Filipino, but you belong in Generation X. You're a Filipino, but you belong in baby boomers. You're a Filipino, but you belong in Generation Y, the millennials. So our identities can overlap based on our social construct. We have what we call intercultural competence. Intercultural competence enables a communicator to understand and interact with other cultures by applying attitudes and values and understanding interaction skills, according to Hubert and Reynolds 2014. So basically, say intercultural competence, it's your skills, it's your abilities to communicate with other people in various social and cultural settings. It entails acceptance of and respect for one's culture, identity, and open-mindedness and sensitivity to others, which means that intercultural competence has a lot of indicators in order for you to measure or perform the skills you have when you communicate with other people from different cultural backgrounds. So there are 8 basic behaviors for intercultural competence, according to Ruben, 1976. First is the display of respect. Okay, respect simply means seeing the value of other cultures regardless of their difference from your own culture. So basically, when we say respect, we acknowledge, we understand that we have differences. We understand that there are things that we do not practice. There are things that different from us, other people. It's also being sensitive to their cultural background. Next, we have orientation. Considering the context behind a person's message is another behavior. See, orientation, it's your background knowledge about the culture of other people. Meaning, like for example, their language, their mannerisms, the way they convey their message, their collective personality or collective attitude. It's part of your orientation or your knowledge about them. Next, we have empathy. You empathize when you put yourself in another person's shoes and try to feel how he or she feels. Empathy aids in building trust, establishing connections with people from other cultures. Excuse me. You say empathy, it refers to putting yourself in another person's situation. In order for you to fully understand them, you need to put yourself in their situation. You try to understand more than who they are, like their background, the language they speak, or anything that makes them up. It means that you need to understand them, put yourself in their situation. Next one is interaction management. Managing interaction refers to knowing how and when to talk appropriately and effectively. So primarily, when we say interaction management, you should know when to take your turn. You need to know when you're going to speak or when you're going to listen. So you should know when to speak up your mind. Next, we have task role behavior. Harmony, teamwork, and productivity are shared goals in intercultural communication. Task role behavior is essential since it lessens any group conflict that may possibly arise. So, you say task role behavior, you should know your place in a group. You should know your function in a social interaction. Next, you have relational role behavior. Relational role behavior aims to take part in establishing and preserving a personal relationship that promotes trust, harmony, and support among participants of intercultural communication. So when you say relational role behavior, you know how to relate with them. It has a thin line between relational group and empathy. Relational group, you know how to understand them, relate with them, fully know their cultural background. We also have tolerance of ambiguity. Tolerance refers to openness to differences, while ambiguity means confusion. In intercultural communication, difficulty and conflict are inevitable. However, to show intercultural competence, tolerance for ambiguity is encouraged to avoid. Oh, wait. However, to show intercultural competence, tolerance for ambiguity is encouraged to avoid hostility and anger. To say tolerance of ambiguity, we need to tolerate that there are things that it's hard for us to understand, especially if we have different languages. Uh, for example, when you communicate with Koreans, South Koreans, or Chinese, and you have no common language to use with in order to successfully communicate. So in order for us to empathize with them, we just have to understand that there are things that are hard for us to understand, and we should tolerate those confusions that arise from the communication since we're speaking different languages. Next is we have emotional expression and interaction posture. A part of culture's feature is how different people express their emotions. To ensure intercultural competence, we should recognize the unique social behavior that develops in any culture. So our culture affects our emotional makeup, or we say our um, psychological makeup, which means that we have different ways in order to express our emotions, or we have different nuances when we communicate with other people. For example, in I think it's Swiss language yata yun, or Dutch. I forgot. I think Dutch yata yun. They have no they have no tone in their language. Wala silang tone. Well, when you say tone, we can identify if what's the emotion behind the statement or the utterance of the person through the tone. But sa kanila, they don't have a tone. So it's hard for you to decipher or decode if they are angry or mad, or if they are fine. Kasi wala silang tone. Dito sa atin, sa Philippines, Filipinos are tonal. If we are mad, we raise our voice. If we are calm, we have lower voice. So we can identify what's the current emotional state of the person. But in other language, it's different because bitonal yung ano nila, yung language nila. Personal characteristics such as patience, sense of humor, and open-mindedness are helpful in bridging intercultural communication gaps. Even so, it can still be challenging to communicate with a person from a different culture. At times, conflict and breakdown of communication is inevitable due to different barriers. Which means that we need to be patient, we need to be understanding when we communicate with other people from different cultures. It's very helpful also when we have sense of humor, when we know how to crack jokes, and we are open-minded, meaning we are open to possibilities, or we are open with our differences. So at times, it's also inevitable if there are instances in a communication wherein we cannot fully understand each other because there are barriers to that. And that's what we're going to discuss next. Barriers to intercultural communication. People who are exposed to many cultures can clash in various ways. Beeman and Dufresne, 2012, identified the following barriers which lead to communication breakdown when people with different cultural backgrounds interact. When we say communication breakdown, it refers to the unsuccessful instances in the communication based on the cultural differences. First is ethnocentrism. Okay, ethnocentrism is a tendency of people to believe that their own cultural norms are the right way of doing things. They mistakenly assume that the specific patterns of behavior desired in their own cultures are universally valued. When we say ethnocentrism, it is the view of one culture that they believe that their culture is dominant and other cultures are subservient, meaning lower. We are, you view that your culture is the superior. That's ethnocentrism. And other cultures are below you. Example, Americans think that their culture is the most dominant. That's an example of ethnocentrism. Another, if you want to understand more about ethnocentrism, there's a film titled American History X. It's about white supremacy. They discriminate Black people. That's a form of ethnocentrism because Americans think that they are far greater than other cultures, especially those who are Black Americans, subservient sa kanila. And the opposite of ethnocentrism is xenocentrism. Say xenocentrism, you view your own culture as inferior or subservient to other cultures because you think that other cultures are dominant or superior. And the tendency is that you forgot your own culture and you try to assimilate or immerse yourself with other culture that you deem as superior than yours. Ganun ang xenocentrism. Next, we have stereotypes. Stereotypes are mental pictures that one group forms from the main characteristics of another group. They usually involve generalized ideas of people in a certain group. Say stereotyping is different from, although they are related, it's different from discrimination and prejudice. You say stereotyping, it's in the cognitive aspect. Say prejudice in the emotional aspect. Discrimination, it's in the a behavioral aspect. The stereotypes, it's they are generalizations about one culture or one group. It's a general belief, even though not all people are like that. Example, all Muslims are terrorists. Just because there are extremists or fundamentalists and who are Muslims, then the tendency of other people is that they generalize that all Muslims are terrorists because there are Muslims who are fundamentalists or extremists. Kaya nagkakaroon ng stereotyping kasi generalize nila. Next is we have interpretation of time. Chronemics is defined as the study of how cultures perceive in time and its use. The difference in the perception of time may affect how people view each other. Therefore, it also influences how they interact. So every culture has different interpretation of time. Just like, for example, in our case, we have what we call Filipino time. We have an appointment at 10 a.m. It's because we have different view about time. We usually go to the place where we're supposed to meet 10 a.m. pero niabot og 11 a.m. 12 noon, 1 p.m. na. Late for 1 hour or 2 hours. Ganon yung interpretation natin sa time, Filipinos. But for example, for Americans, it's different. When we say 10 a.m., it's 10 a.m. or before 10 a.m. You should be there on the place of meeting. Kasi it will give negative impression to them. Sa atin, it's different. Ito. American time versus Filipino time. We also have what we call personal space. Proxemics is a study of cultural space requirements. Space operates as a language just as time does. In all cultures, the distance between people functions in communication as personal space or personal territory. Right? You say proxemics, it's about space, it's about distance. For example, in Philippine culture, it's fine for us if we have close proximity, if we are not that distant. It's evident in jeepneys. Diba? Okay lang sa atin magdikit-dikit. It's fine with us. But although this current situation is different because we have to maintain social distancing because of the pandemic, but during pre-pandemic, dikit-dikit lang tayo, close proximity, because that's our culture. It's different from American culture. They value their personal space or their privacy. Sa atin, okay lang. Kaya dito sa atin, like for example, maraming chismoso, chismosa, kasi we tend to invade the personal lives of other people. Kasi okay lang sa atin yung close proximity. Whereas in US or mga low context culture, like sa Western culture, they value so much of their tawag doon, kanilang privacy or personal space. But sa high context culture, kagaya ng mga Asian cultures, sa Philippines, for example, if you are fond of watching K-drama, we have commonalities in terms of how we interact with our neighbors. Ganon. So, Americans value privacy, thus awareness of personal space is very important. Next one is body language. Body language is not universal, but is learned from one's culture. Even the most basic gestures have varying cultural meanings. Okay. There are gestures that are common or universal among cultures, among different cultures, but there are also gestures that have different interpretation or different meaning. Like for example, sa atin yung thumbs up, okay ito, or meaning you agree or you affirm something, thumbs up. Pero sa ibang culture, I think sa Middle East yata yun, it has different meaning, itong thumbs up. I think it has sexual innuendo, something related with sexuality. Ganun yung ibig sabihin ng thumbs up. Like, sa ibang culture naman, ito sa atin, itong 3 fingers natin, when we gesture like this, in our culture, it means money. Pero sa other culture, I think sa Malaysia yata yun, or Indonesia, or Thailand. Basta dyan lang na countries. It has different meaning. Meaning nito is another sexual innuendo. Kaya may kakilala ako, I have a friend of mine, when she went to Malaysia yata, I really forgot, Malaysia or Indonesia. She had a gesture like this. Tapos, she was slapped by, by a local doon sa place na yon. Kasi, bastos yung ibig sabihin nito. And her intention is different from the meaning of that specific country. Do sa kanya, she meant money when she gesture like this, pero sa kanila kasi ibig sabihin. That's why nagkaroon ng miscommunication or misunderstanding. That's why we need to be careful about our gestures also. The hand gesture, okay, in France means zero. In Japan, it's mani. In Brazil, it's an expression of vulgarity. That's why merong pagkakaiba. There are differences when it comes to our gestures. Next one is translation limitations. Words in one language do not always have equivalent meanings in other languages. The concepts of the words described are often different as well. So, there are words in our language that do not have equivalent meaning or exact equivalent in other language. Remember your assessment activity, your previous lesson, yung where I tasked you to search for words that have or do not have equivalent meaning in English, in Filipino words. So kasi cultural din kasi yung language. Meaning because we have unique culture, or we say all cultures are unique. Although there are commonalities, but there are differences. Kaya nagkakaroon ng words that do not have equivalent meaning. For example, yung word na kilig, ganon. The word kilig has no equivalent meaning in English. For example, since culture also affects or influences by the geographical location, there are also words that are unique in our language or words that do not have equivalent meaning in other language. Halimbawa, dito sa atin, we only have 2 seasons, rainy season and dry season. We don't have winter, spring, summer. May summer tayo, but we don't have yung 4 seasons. Wala tayo niyan, yung winter, spring, kasi dalawa lang sa atin. Walang winter sa atin, so walang snow, which means that there's no word available for snow in Filipino language except yung anong tawag doon? Yung niebe. Pero kasi itong word na niebe, although it's direct translation of snow, pero borrowed word lang siya from Spanish language. Remember, we are influenced by Spanish culture because of the colonization of Spaniards. Borrowed lang siya. Hindi siya direct equivalent talaga from Filipino language. There are also words that do not have equivalent meaning kasi hindi dito sa atin na-develop. Like for example, the computer. Many of the technological words that were only borrowed from other language. It's because they're not being developed here in our country. Computer, laptop, cell phone. The word gigil and kilig have no equivalent terms in English. But there are also words in Filipinos that were borrowed and included in English language, especially in American English, because of the presence of Filipino overseas. Nagkakaroon ng Filipino community doon. Thus, the language, the words in our language being borrowed in American English, like bundok, mga Filipino dishes like adobo, etc. What's this? Let's try to watch this video.
And as you quite rightly say, my name, Pellegrino, which is my first name, means pilgrim. It was given to me by my Italian parents. It's as if they knew what I was going to do for the rest of my life. Let's give them the name pilgrim and then let's have the world. And that's basically what I do. This is my workplace. There's a lot of traveling. I could give you a fancy title of what I do, but what I really do is I try to help people communicate, especially in a global business world. So I try to help people communicate better with other nationalities. The first thing you think of when you work with other nationalities is communication, especially with the other cultures. Well, I take a step further. I say to people, take a look at yourself. So I'm going to talk a lot about perception. Talk about perception, understanding what people see. Now, as you say, I have Italian in me. I have a lot of British in me. Some people are surprised by my English accent. Quite nice, isn't it? You weren't expecting this. I know you weren't. You're expecting me to speak with the Italian accent. Don't speak like that. And I've been in Norway for over a third of my life, actually. So I've got a lot of Norwegian in me as well. And I love what I like doing with people. I have these social experiments. Test their perception of it. Now, as I say, I travel a lot, so I like playing with the airlines. I like going up to the airlines and talking English. See what kind of reactions I get. And English is the best one. If you want good service, speak English like I do. Fantastic. People speak English. Well, they do. I mean, yesterday the flight program was late, and if I go up and say, excuse me, it's 30 minutes late, I'm a person, I don't like being late, they should take you seriously. But yesterday I thought I'd try it in an Italian accent. So I went up and I actually said, excuse me, but the flight is 30 minutes late, I'm a punctual person. Exactly. I got the same reaction as you did there, yeah? And this is one of the problems of working with other nationalities. People see what they want to see, and they don't always see what you see. And this is one of the challenges now. Just before we get into it, culture. Let's look at culture. Culture, my definition of culture. I know this problem. But let's keep it simple. I used to do 2-day workshops with this. A system of behavior that helps us act in an accepted way. Keywords there, accepted individual. We're basically doing things which are accepted in our social group, which are not familiar. So a lot of my work is actually explaining Norwegian behavior. So I'm constantly looking for this sort of, can we describe a Norwegian in a nutshell? And I think I found it. I found this fantastic text on the internet. I want you to read it with me. It's worth reading it. If you were to use a colour to describe this person, it has to be green. He lives in isolation in his home of place. He best describes his music and cozy. However, he's not the most receptive of people. Okay? He is somewhat primitive, but he is honest and straightforward, and all he really wants in life are the simple difficulties that you recognize any of this. There are some key words that kind of, can you see that? They jump out at you, and you think, okay, it's a stereotype, but a lot of this is a bit true. And I show this to Norwegians, and they're kind of, okay, I'll give you that one. And then I surprise them. This is a description, not of the Norwegian, but of a Hollywood film star. Yeah, would you like to know who it is? There it is. It's that person there. And the point about this is you often believe what people tell you as well. I could sit there and tell you this is a Norwegian, and you believe it. It's not a Norwegian at all. Although maybe this could be a Norwegian, there is going off the character. But there are many words in there which are accepted and familiar. Accepted and familiar. Now, another accepted and familiar thing about Norwegian life is the Norwegian forest. I live in the Oslo area, it's a forest. And working across borders is basically, not accepting your assumptions, other assumptions. And the Norwegian forest is good, isn't it? It's all good. It's fresh air, it's nature, it's elves, it's skiing. It's fantastic. Well, that's what my wife thought the first time my father visited Norway, because she thought he would do something else. So my wife asked my Italian father, would you like to go to the forest? My father looked at her and said, why? And I had to explain to my wife that you can't say if you say to another Italian, hey, you and me, we go for a walk in the forest, that means something else. You don't do that, yeah? But how can you know that, Because, how could she know that? Accepted and familiar. At the time we went for a drive with my father, and we're all looking at the same thing. Look at this, beautiful Norwegian landscape. And my father's taking photographs, he wants to show his friends. And road is kind of bumpy, so he said to my wife, slow the car down, please. Stop the car. I want to take a proper photo. So my wife says, but this is funny. There's nothing here. And he says, I know, I never seen nothing before. But, you know, what was amazing with this is we're looking at the same pictures and we're using completely different words to describe that. And this is the challenge working with community. We've got different ideas of acceptance and familiar. Here's what's accepted and familiar to me when I speak. I was raised in the UK. We are the world champions. Waiting in line. And you know, oh wait, we're fantastic, yeah? You know, if you're waiting in line in a supermarket in the UK, let's say there are 10 people waiting in line. And we're all getting a bit impatient, you know, because we're waiting in line. And then they open a new cash register. You know what will happen in the UK? The first 4 people, they won't move, they'll stay in queue. The next 6 people will move to the next cash register in more or less the same order. And they kind of check with each other. And if they open another cash register, the same will happen. It's like a formation dance. It's fantastic, yeah? Would the same happen in Norway? No. What would happen if they shout out in Norwegian, it's ledig kassa, which is available cash register? What happens? Everybody goes for it. It's first come, first served. Isn't that what's acceptable to me? Yeah? Now, the first time that happened to me, I was shocked. And I said some not very nice things about the meeting. But, you know, you've got to dig a bit deeper to find out why do Norwegians do that? Why are they running for that cash register? Why is it a free for all first come served? I think it's got to do with this. What is it? This is the King of Norway on a train in 1973, that guy in the cap on the right. This is equality. And I think the queuing system in Norway is all about equality. First come, first served is about equality. And it's the ability to think under the surface to find out what the underlying values are. That's how you know how to communicate. So this thing with equality is really important. It's the reason they're so late for each other. You don't follow the titles, you dress casually. It makes a fantastic business environment, doesn't it? But sometimes it's easy to feel by surprise. And in those situations where you feel uncomfortable or irritated, the other thing is negative rather than positive situations. You know? And I mean, I travel all over the world. And I know you're not supposed to, this isn't an advertisement for the airlines, but it's Scandinavian Airlines and it's Lufthansa and it's Singapore Airlines. Everybody knows Singapore Airlines is the service. Why? Because they have a lot more hierarchy than society. And therefore, when they serve you, they serve you. And Singapore Airlines staff, I think you've ever been in the Singapore Airlines flight, the moment they welcome you, you look at them and serve them. It's just body language. It's like anything for you, sir. Now, if the 7-8 airlines first when you came on, yeah, exactly, you'd get suspicious, wouldn't you? What's going on? Because it's not accepted or familiar. That's it, you know? This is what it's all about. So this is how we do it. And look at the space. Space is important. Nobody's touching. And if you want to somewhere like Finland, that space becomes even more. Can you see that? Fantastic. And look at the way they queue in France. There's nothing like the way I'm used to queuing. And it's different every day. It's never the same. And in some cultures, you need a bit more motivation to stand in line. And this is my favorite one. This is fantastic. Look at this. Isn't that great? They're all different. We're all doing the same thing in slightly different ways. Now, how do you get across borders? How do you navigate through this? You can't learn all the codes. Here's the tip. This is what I'm really passionate about. Curiosity. I am, have been, always will be. Curiosity gets you to your life. I believe you can ask any question, anybody, about just about anything, provided you do. That's it. And curiosity is a great thing now. I've got 3 kids.
Guys, sorry to stop the video because it's already 10:46. I think you have next class pa. Unfortunately, we cannot finish watching all the videos that I prepared for you. I will post, if you want to watch that, they're very educational. You can gain a lot of information, the videos that supposedly I'm going to present to you for this meeting, but unfortunately, we don't have enough time. So if you want to watch the videos remaining lang, I will post in our Psychology. Kung gusto nyo lang ha, you check the videos. Kasi ano na, 10:47 na. 10:50 mag-end yung meeting natin. And then, by the way, next week, may long quiz tayo sa lahat ng subject. Sa oral com, AAPP, at saka, wait lang. Next week. Next week na lang kasi next week tapusin muna natin. Okay lang sa inyo. Tapusin muna natin lahat yung lessons natin because by next week, we'll be able to finish all the lessons, all the subjects sa APP, sa oral com, and for the UMS sa sa world religions. So, next week tapusin lahat tapos by the following week mag long quiz tayo. Okay lang sa inyo. Tapusin muna natin lahat before we conduct long quizzes. May 2 long quiz per subject. Okay lang sa inyo. I need a response. Okay lang daw kay Hermione. Sige. So it's already 10:48. I think that concludes our meeting for this day. I hope guys you learned something from our discussion. We'll post the video later siguro and the videos that I'm supposed to let you watch for this lesson in order to supplement the topic that we have discussed. So I think